Welcome to the ZNL Podcast, a podcast brought to you by ZN, the OG digital agency in Brussels.
Hello and welcome to this edition of the ZNL Podcast. I am delighted to have a very special guest today. Neville Hobson is an incredibly experienced communicator. He's been on the agency side, he's been consulting with organizations, and he is a podcaster doing the For Immediate Release podcast for 30 years. Welcome, Neville. So happy to have you here.
Likewise, Philip. Thank you very much. And by the way, it's 20 years, not 30 years.
20
I haven't
years.
quite got to. Yep.
Excellent. Thank you for correcting me. So you've basically worked in a whole range of different environments, and also using a lot of different tools, a lot of different technologies. And of course, you've got a lot of experience, so you've seen the landscape of communication being transformed. Now, recently, you talked about communication chaos, which I think is a fair description of the environment that we feel like we're in today. But before we try to discuss what that is, I want to ask for your perspective. In your career, how many times did you feel we were in a chaotic environment of massive destruction? Is this really different, or is it truly unique?
That's a good question. The kind of the simple answer would be to say that every time there's change, we're involved in chaos. I remember that from desktop publishing when that came out in the 80s. I mean, the fax machine, for instance, all the things that happened in the 90s with the web, it caused chaos because of the need to understand what all this meant for us as communicators and what individually you had to do as a communicator, and indeed within the team, if you were in an organization, all of that. Communication chaos, as we are currently in, the stage we're currently in, mostly because of the advent of artificial intelligence, which has been in the mainstream now in terms of people's ability to do things with AI tools, such as chatbots. People are familiar with ChatGPT, obviously, but there are many others, is causing chaos, a chaos in understanding, a chaos in usage, chaos in understanding the ethics of it all, privacy issues, you name it. It's within us. So the term communication chaos was in recent use, which is what prompted my focus on it in the last month or so. A post on LinkedIn by Catherine Arrow, who really did hit the nail on the head, where she talked about the troubling reality of truth being under attack. And that's how she framed her article. I thought that was a good way to do it, because that is one way of looking at what chaos means in this context. It's not necessarily the equivalent of an untidy office and you can't find everything. It's a chaotic situation. It is the world in which we are dwelling. It is the place where we connect with others online, in particular. It is how we structure our digital communication and determining what we communicate to whom and how. How do we ensure that our messages are understood and, more importantly, are treated as truthful when there is so much untruth out there and mistake by this rather lovely phrase, bad actors who are there to do bad things. That is part of our landscape. This is not brand new, but this situation has accelerated in the past 5 years, since the pandemic, in fact, in my view. So it is difficult. Navigating it is tricky, and that is the task we have to figure out.
Now, you mentioned a couple of different things, and just to step back, we have the bigger factors. We have the Trump administration, not just because of the Trump presidency, but because of what it represents in terms of language, in terms of debate, polarization, and messaging. So I think there's a political aspect. There's the platform part, which is the tools, the social media tools, X becoming increasingly aggressive and again, polarizing. And then you mentioned AI, and I want to come back to that in a second. But how much do you think this chaos is the result of these platforms. And there's a lot of thinking and writing about how social media has created polarization, and then aside from that, a new political reality with people who basically are populist politicians and who believe that the angrier the message, the more traction it gets. So how would you say platforms versus populists?
I don't think there's a single cause, Philip, at all. It's platform fragmentation, AI-generated content, shifting audience behaviors. All of these things play a role. You mentioned Trump, the political element. We're seeing, as we have seen in the last few weeks, how communication, if you like, in the broad sense, is being weaponized to suit particular agendas. We saw that with that extraordinary encounter in the White House between Trump and Zelensky a few weeks back. And it's moved the goalposts in the sense of what we see as acceptable now, or what we see happening that we hadn't seen happening before. So levels of politeness have shifted, and the way in which we hold discourse. I think Edelman's Trust Barometer 2025 actually addresses this area extremely well with the research they've done across the 20 plus countries they conduct this research in, where we're seeing this fragmentation almost of society in a sense across the board that is a continuance, but on a bigger scale for what has been reported in a number of previous years. I think the decline of traditional gatekeepers, meaning mostly the mainstream media, means that anyone can be a publisher. That started when blogs first came on the scene in the early part of the century, which creates an explosion of content, but also misinformation, because anyone can say anything, and unless you verify it or you know the person or you know the subject, you can't possibly do that. And therein lies a huge dilemma, a particular time now, which adds to the chaos, where you have previously trustworthy institutions and people who spoke the truth. Now you question everything in a sense, and it makes it worse when you have a person in the form of the current U.S. president who literally weaponizes untruth by what he defines as truth, and it's concerning because a lot of people are taken in by this. And the reality we see, particularly now, is that many people simply republish that content without any verification at all, and that magnifies itself as it goes around online. So that gives us as communicators an even greater pressure to verify everything that we are saying on behalf of our clients, our employers, or whatever field of communication we're in terms of ensuring that we are trustworthy in what we're saying. We are sure of our facts. And so transparency becomes more important as well. I think AI accelerates all this. This is, again, the downside of AI. By making content generation faster and cheaper, it's automated. And so there's more of it because of that. If AI wasn't around, there would not be so much. So meanwhile, in parallel, I suppose, audiences, i.e. the people, are more skeptical, more fragmented across more platforms, making it harder to reach and engage them effectively. So this is the core landscape in which we live.
Okay, I want to take a slight counterpoint on AI, and
Sure.
I have this interesting view, which I understand what you're saying. There's an acceleration of misinformation. There's also something else that I've seen. So if you go to Grok, which is the AI platform of Elon Musk, and you ask the question, what is the biggest spreader of misinformation on X? The answer is Elon Musk, RFK, and Donald Trump, which is an answer that we kind of know Elon Musk does not like. And yet, for his tool to work, he had to allow it, if you want, to provide facts that were not completely, unlike the platform where he basically is clearly using it as a political tool. The AI tool, if you make it completely controlled and biased, becomes much more difficult to gain credibility. Now, the other thing that I've read about is that they've conducted a number of studies asking people who believe in conspiracy theories to discuss those theories on ChatGPT, and they found that there was a measurable decline in their beliefs in these conspiracy theories when they used ChatGPT to just challenge their belief because of the incredible patience the AI has. It's like, oh, well, these are the studies, etc. And actually, I'm using AI tools to fact check a lot of things all the time. And of course, I know that they're not perfect, but I find that they might play a very interesting role in fact checking. So I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do the same. I use ChatGPT as my primary generative AI tool, and I ask it things, part of research. The version I'm using on the Pro subscription now cites sources, which was the big missing link in ChatGPT, making it easier to verify. And so I do put in the time on almost everything I use it for to verify the facts. Even if I look at an output it's given me and I read it and I think, yep, I know all this. It's true. I know this. I still check it. And so that adds time, but you have to do that. So Grok is interesting. I haven't used Grok at all. I don't use X really. But if it produced those answers to those questions, then would I trust that? Difficult question to answer. I probably wouldn't yet. We sort of, well, I was going to say we know it's true. Do we? Do we know it's true? If you ask any of the other primary generative AI tools, ChatGPT, Perplexity, Claude, Gemini, would they say the same? I haven't done that, but I suspect they would. Yep. In which case, then take it as gospel and that it is true. It's to me, this is more an academic exercise to kind of the what ifs on this kind of topic, because most people in business certainly aren't going to be asking Grok that kind of question. In fact, they're not going to be using Grok at all. So I think using those tools are valid things, and this may be something you might have noted to talk a little later in our conversation here, but the verification aspect of all of this is so essential that many people do not verify. And I read some people saying it's a generational thing. The younger you are, the less likely you are to you distrust stuff you see online. I don't know if that is true or not. I've not read more about that. But I say to that, nevertheless, we as communicators must do this if we are to be taken credibly, and if we are to persuade clients in particular that we are the ones they should be hiring to help them with this, because we verify all the facts. We give the citations. It's very open and transparent. We don't hide the sources. We share them with the client too. So that aids us, in which case, why wouldn't we do it? That's the thing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And just my example on Grok is because I find it surprising that given the very clear agenda of Elon Musk, the fact that this throws this information, and I compare it to all the other tools as well. But I think what's interesting, and for me, what makes me slightly optimistic here is that for an AI tool to work, it needs to kind of fix the hallucination problems. And the better it gets at fact checking, the more useful it becomes as a tool. And so I think there is an incentive for OpenAI, for Gemini, for all the different platforms to try to improve the fact checking. So I think for us as citizens, individuals, and communicators, it's becoming an increasingly useful tool. And by the way, one of my favorite usage of AI tools right now is deep research, which I think is fantastic. I use it on OpenAI, but also I run comparisons between OpenAI, Gemini, and Grok has another version. And even Perplexity. So what I do is I run the 4, and then you see what it tells you. For me, this has been one of the most useful kind of business case, use case of AI tools. What is yours?
Well, research, definitely. I know that ChatGPT has one of their tools is for deep research. I rarely use that unless I'm doing what I define as deep research. That's not very often. I'm doing day-to-day research, if you will, checking something or finding out facts about something or information about something that I'm either writing or preparing on behalf of a client, for instance, as part of research I'm doing for a project. So I think it is important. I think usage, I don't use, well, I already mentioned I don't use Grok, but I do use Gemini. I do use ChatGPT. I do use Claude occasionally. But ChatGPT is the prime one. But the other factor to add into all this, Philip, is another reality, which is that all of us, including bad actors, etc., are contributing content which is used by a lot of these, or all of these generative AI tools for training and so forth. What happens if much of that is incorrect? And therein lies a huge dilemma, and I don't see a solution to it anyway yet, which is that I'm sure there are people out there who are literally deliberately churning out false information and putting it up there, talking to ChatGPT, talking to the other chatbots. Here is a source, summarize this report, or give me a summary, or give me an assessment of this. What does it mean about that? And it's based on false information. So I don't have a solution to that myself. I've not seen anyone else proposing one, in which case, is it as big as a problem as I think it is going to be? Not necessarily what it is now, but the reality speaks for itself. It seems to me that all the information that we are sharing with a generative AI tool in particular is going into, unless we've ticked the box saying, I do not want you to use any of this for your training. Most people don't do that. I don't do that except on a per case basis. And I make sure not to disclose information related to a client by name or anything identifiable. I have another chatbot I use for that kind of purpose, which is a bespoke one I built with ChatGPT. I know others have installed these tools locally on your own computer, so it's not connected to the network when they do this kind of thing, and that may be another solution. But the thing is, though, that all of this content, we might be sure on our contribution to it and our verification activity, but that is not likely to be the majority of content you find out there. So it means when you prompt your generative AI tool for something and you give it the details of what you want it to do, and it goes out there and researches it, then it's finding all that information too. How does it tell the difference? And that is simply, to me, a question mark. I don't have an answer to that.
Yeah, and there's actually a shift from search engine optimization to a form of AI optimization. So people trying to create content that will get picked up by AI tools. And so now there are companies that used to be doing search engine optimization that are saying, look, if you want to get this in that AI tool, this is the kind of information that you need to create. And I think that's the move we're going to see as people start using AI tools increasingly for search. Which I think is basically a trend that we're seeing right now.
Yeah, I agree. And we've seen already interesting developments in that area where ChatGPT, or rather Perplexity, I believe, was the one who led the field with this, which is you ask it a search question. And in my case, I would ask it the same way I'd ask Google. I tend to literally use conversational terms with Google. How do I do X, or where would I find Y? And I ask it those words. And the difference we found with Perplexity in particular was that what you got back was a narrative response with sources cited, rather than, as Google was at the time, as what you got back was a list of links. And often the priority links were the advertisers who'd paid money. So not very useful, whereas Perplexity is giving you the complete answer and also saying you might be interested in this as well. So what we've seen happening is Google has joined that club, and you now see far more meaningful results in search. The issue that I think concerns a lot of people in marketing in particular is that with the complete answer, the game has changed drastically in that you've got the complete answer, so you don't need to visit the website. You don't need to go to that place, because why? You've got the answer. Shell and I have talked about this on For Immediate Release quite a few times, and my view on it is that you can't change this. Indeed, you need to embrace this. What you need to change is how you do this. So you've got to do this in a way, if you're a marketer, for instance, that provides the chatbot with the means to provide the complete answer, because that's what people are expecting now. They're not expecting something that they've got to have 3 clicks to get what they want. to provide the complete answer in a way that satisfies the goals you are seeking to achieve. And that's going to depend on what they are specifically. So if it means that you're looking for this information about this, I don't know, this plug-in hybrid car, that instead of asking the question, it gives you a list of car dealers, which is what Google used to do. Here it will give you valuable information, including links to some of the sources that you might have been involved in preparing those answers, and over time, that's what shows up in the result. So you've got to understand how the SEO market is shifting, how search has changed radically with the advent of AI, and how it is still developing. So it's something to pay attention to.
Yeah, and Google actually is running AI mode now in the Google Labs. I've been testing it for a week or so, and it's actually, I find it very natural. So it gives you, as you said, it's a perplexity type of thing with an answer. And actually, I'm finding myself using that quite naturally, because it's a very nice way to say, hey, I'm looking for this information, and it gives you the answer, and then it gives you the sources. So I think that's where SEO is moving, and I suspect that we're going to see a pretty big shift towards a different usage. Now, in terms of platform shifts and change in communication, communicators have to advise their clients on where to go to get their message to the audience. And at some point, this was, Twitter was the main kind of platform for certain conversations. This, of course, got kind of dramatically challenged in the past years with the Elon Musk takeover, the rebranding, and the political focus of the platform. And now we are in this kind of state of massive fragmentation. We see, new tools, whether it's Mastodon, Blue Sky, X, or newsletters, Substack, etc. How do you navigate these different tools, and how do you tell your clients to approach the all these tools that just look a little bit uncertain? We don't really have that much experience for them. So what's your approach to tool fragmentation?
I think it really comes down to one thing, in my view, which is that you need to know or have a pretty good idea of where the people you want to reach are. Where are they online? Like you said, Philip, before, it was a given. Twitter was the go-to place. And that was true right up until not long after Elon Musk took over, probably about the time he changed the name from Twitter to X, I think. Mm-hmm. So it's difficult to do that now, in which case I have a simple view on it, which is that you can't be everywhere. You really cannot be everywhere now. Mm-hmm. And it makes little sense to be everywhere. You need to pick places that your audiences are where you expect to see them. And I probably qualify what I'm saying here really by saying that this is not something that happens instantly. This is going to be the result of the work you have done over the years to establish your presence online in all the places where you have been. So you are already in all of these places yourself, probably. Then your change now is to focus on the ones that are not toxic, the ones that are good places to be from your own reputational perspective, where your clients are as well, and they have those expectations. So what that means to me, for instance, if you're a major brand, Twitter X is not the best place for you to be. In which case, where is the best place? Well, the answer, I'm afraid, will sound like a cop-out, because that's going to be wherever you have found your key audiences to be that isn't X. Is that Facebook, which is a walled garden? It's not open publicly. Is it one of the other places that are emerging, like Threads, for instance? Blue Sky, perhaps? Mastodon? Is it some of the old guard? Reddit? Again, it is fragmented, and the numbers don't look very attractive to you, where you've got, for instance, ranging from Facebook with 3 billion users, whether they're monthlies, dailies, or whatever, doesn't matter. Let's call them all 3 billion users, through to Twitter with its 600 million or whatever, down to Blue Sky with its 33 million currently. So if volume numbers matter to you, then you need to take that into account. But I would argue that you need to be looking at it very differently than that, because 3 billion Facebook users are not your audience. That's the total people, according to Meta, who are using the platform. So you need to determine where your niche is on those platforms. And you've got plenty of tools that will help you do that built into the platforms. You've also got pretty powerful tools such as, for instance, Brandwatch or Meltwater that will help you do this. But if you're an enterprise business, excuse me, you're already doing this, I'm sure. So you have a pretty good idea of what you need to be doing. If you're a medium to small business or an individual, for instance, is not necessarily the case. Yet there are still things you can do yourself, and using the native platforms is a good start. It will take a while. But that makes a lot of sense to me. And indeed, that's something I've embraced in the changes that I've made to how I do my business, how I work this year, which I can talk about a bit later if you'd like to. But to me, SEO is not the thing at all for me. It's the engagement. It's writing content that resonate with people and not the algorithm. I mean, it's putting it simply. So I'm not writing stuff myself as a blogger on any platform simply because I know it's going to get amplified by an algorithm. I write it because that's where people are that I'd like to talk to based on my own research, or that I find people with like minds on LinkedIn, for instance, or elsewhere. So I can make that decision quite easily because I don't have huge brand issues that I need to achieve. And I have these conversations with clients too. So I think you need to know more about your audience before you can make this kind of decision. And it might surprise you. It certainly surprised me when I learned that too many, even enterprise customers, have little clue who their audiences are and where they are. Yep. So that doesn't help you at all in this change. And what I suspect most people are doing is kind of just carrying on with the status quo. That's one reason why Twitter hasn't collapsed. You see, for instance, all the talk, which tends to be on the other platforms, about what a terrible place Twitter is or X is now, and you need to move away, and it's not good for you, and all this stuff, and that falls on deaf ears until something happens, like Trump wins the election, or there's dreadful things happening on X with white supremacists or Nazis or whatever, and it upsets people, and they feel they move away. And I see in Europe, we've had recently huge groups of professions. Germany, for instance, academia, universities, and a bunch of others have moved from X, not quit. They've moved to Threads or Blue Sky. They're still maintaining the presence on X. And that is because whatever we think and whether we like it or not, X is still a most significant platform to disseminate messages to mass audiences, particularly by governments, by large corporations and product announcements and so forth. So that I don't believe is going to change anytime soon. But what I do see happening is many of those institutions are now starting up presences on some of those other places in addition to that. So over time, it might be that they will diminish, but that will also require an audience to be building on those other places instead of X. So this, I don't see really changing, certainly not during 2025, in terms of any mass shift we're likely to see. What we are seeing, though, is a little trickling stream. There's certainly not a swollen river rushing down the riverbed. And over time, little by little, we're seeing things changing. So I think it's good because it tells us that most people prefer a place that is a pleasant place to be, that they can have nice conversations with friendly, like-minded people, not the toxicity and insults and outrage, the sheer anger that you see, of which I believe much of it is manufactured simply to cause this kind of discord that you're seeing on places like X. So the landscape is changing. As communicators, we need to be much more knowledgeable about the landscape and where we want to be and where our audiences are moving to, but also recognizing that the big place like X isn't going to go away anytime soon.
Yeah, no, very good point. And this is something that we discuss every year. We have an EU influencer event where we look at who are the top influencers. They used to be very much on X, on Twitter. And this has shifted actually last year. A lot of people there were much more focused on LinkedIn as a kind of an alternative to X. I think that, from the client's perspective, and especially when we're looking at the EU approach, it's very much a niche business in the sense that every organization has quite a specific audience. And so, if you're going to say, well, I want to go after the German scientist, Blue Sky or Mastodon might be the right place for you. If I want to go into professionals in B2B sectors, then LinkedIn should definitely be where you should spend more time. And I think this is the map that communicators will need to do. And it's going to be quite complicated and messy every time, because you're going to have to say, well, it's probably a bit of this, a bit of that, and a bit of something else. And then there's the rebirth, I think, of good content on your website, blog, and newsletter, which you then take ownership of. And I know this is something that you've been doing. And of course, there are, podcasts that are all the rage and have been for some time, but it's really come back with a vengeance. And I want to hear your thoughts on old technology, so-called old technology, coming back. But before that, I think there's one thing that I've seen with X, which is, there was a big discussion in the last year of people quitting X, and I think that a lot of that has happened. Now, however, for big companies, it's actually become more difficult to do that, because you're making a political statement. And if you're an international organization that has business in the United States, it's becoming, something that they have to think about twice. So I think a lot of companies are not quitting X because of that. So they're still staying there just because they don't want to make a statement that they've left. But as you said, they then need to create engagement, because the engagement on X has truly suffered. I think because of the way the algorithm shifted. So they need to do that new exercise in finding alternatives. But I want to come to you in terms of, blogs, podcasts, and newsletters. How do you think those tools are doing? And has it been constant for you, or is it a kind of resurgence that you're seeing now?
I'd use the word renaissance, actually. I think for some. But your prime point, Philip, is absolutely valid, that before you start broadcasting messages on any platform and say, hey, our audience is over here on Blue Sky, let's hit them up with messaging. Two things I think you need to be clear on. One is what are you communicating, and what's the value proposition? Where is it? Is it simply a tweet, or is it based on a link, a call to action, go here? In which case, what's at the go here destination? Is that like a marketing text, or is it a story? Is it something genuinely engaging? And I have to say, I sound to myself even like a broken record sometimes when I talk about this, because this has not changed at all since the advent of blogs. The stories that we tell, and I use those phrases deliberately, because whether you're a B2B business looking at engaging with others to sell your product or service, if you've got some kind of story that you're telling, for instance, you might be in a charity protecting wildlife, whatever it might be, you've got a story you want to tell, and you will use a blog or a social network as your source that you'll then amplify. I think the days are numbered, in my view, for the way we've been doing these things for the past 2 decades. So the early 20s, or what do you call them, the noughties and the 2010s. Those were the time for the social media marketing at humongous scale. Everyone was doing it, and much of it, I think, ignored the reality that people like stories. They don't like being sold to, and we saw a lot of effort going into this kind of thing. And now I think we've reached a stage where it's quite clear that many people do not like the climate and the environment in some of these platforms, because all they get for their experience of being on X, on whatever the platform is being sold at, being marketed at, as opposed to being engaged with. And I have those conversations with clients to help them understand that, even because they'll disagree and say, well, this is what we've been doing. Look at the metrics. And I say, yeah, look at those metrics showing you engagements. And you should be looking at double, treble, or whatever it might be of the number that you're seeing that you think is great. And why is it so low? It's because you're not sharing anything remotely engaging as your intended reader would see it, not how you're seeing it, is what do they see? And so that's what you need to address. And then in the case of blogs, and I use my own as an example, I switched from a business-oriented blog entirely, which I was running on WordPress, to one that is not that at all. I'm running on Ghost. I made that move a week ago. The old blog's now an archive. It's still there, and I have a new one with a new domain. And that has given me a completely renewed sense of purpose on storytelling. So it's not about SEO. It's not about algorithms. I don't care about any of that. I'll share it on the main platforms I'm on. Plus, it also publishes a newsletter, which WordPress did too. But this is way different than that. So if I were a business, and there are a number of big enterprises using Ghost, for instance, I would be doing something like that, where you're definitely seeing a shift in terms of content many people prefer. This is not mass shift, by the way. Could be lots of niches, I'm not sure, where people like the personalized direct communication rather than the mass communication on an open social platform, where it's manipulated. You don't know who to trust. You'll get people with weird approaches leaving comments. You'll get trolls. You get all the stuff you can't control at all. Whereas if you have a newsletter that you signed up for, that you can engage with others on a blog that's private, meaning no one can leave a comment unless they've registered as a member of that blog. They can still see the comments publicly. That's a better option for many people, which is one reason why these newsletters, such as published by Substack, such as you can do on Beehive, such as you do on Ghost, the growth in those communication tools. So you need, I think, to rethink the nature of your communication with people on social networks, because that landscape has shifted, and you need to shift to not meet that change, to do better than that change. So it really means reestablishing and reinventing yourself to appeal to people who are more critical of these big spaces, are looking for something a little more personalized, that's smaller, that's niche, that is directly related to their interests, that presents a problem for marketers, frankly, because it's not at scale. And some of these places don't permit marketers. Most of the members of the Fediverse of Mastodon, which is a core element of the so-called Fediverse, do not permit advertising on any of the individual servers. Some do, and that's interesting. The nature of the Fediverse. Think of it, it's a federation, right? And the good analogy, two analogies: the United States with the states that are individuals and members of a federation, the European Union, very similar. So that's, in a sense, how the metaverse operate, how the Fediverse operates. And we're seeing, I think, when I have conversations with people and what I see other people talking about in that regard, is that's a very appealing future that we're looking at, where, instead of this toxicity we see all around us, we are having far more calmer spaces with which to engage with others, even those who are not of like minds, having polite engagement. Now, other critics of that view say this is utterly naive. This does not reflect the reality of human beings, and they may be right in the current state of polarization that is global, especially in the United States, where you have an atmosphere of rage. Does that seem that way to you, Philip? Because that's what it looks like to me. There are so many angry people, it seems, that if you say something, you'll find 10 people piling in to violently disagree with you. And it destroys the whole pleasure of being there. And the only way, I believe, to fix that, because you can't change that behavior, is to do it somewhere that doesn't have that kind of environment, which is where the idea of these niche networks. Now, LinkedIn is a walled garden. It's algorithmically controlled. It's owned by a huge corporation, Microsoft. But LinkedIn groups, in my experience, are excellent places if you pick the right one to be part of, and particularly if they truly are private to the group members. So there's some way that it doesn't require you to learn something new, assuming that's where the people are you'd like to engage with. So you have opportunities all around us now, I think, to make our own stands with this. For companies, particularly enterprises, I don't think it is so simple. But I often then counter my own argument by saying, but why shouldn't it be so simple? Because people can make these decisions quite easily. I suspect partly it's because it's a major shift to make that kind of change into an uncertainty where you're judged by results, financial and otherwise. So it's not so easy in that regard. But these things happen little by little. And I think of the half dozen or so, it's probably more, nearly close to 10, I think it's 9 private groups I'm a member of on Facebook, which is my main use of Facebook, is to participate in these groups. They're great. But oftentimes, some I like quite a bit, but I miss the kind of more business-like cut and thrust of the conversation. So that's not yet the place I would end up on. In which case, one choice I have is to try and build something myself, and there are tools that let you do that. But this is the environment we're in, Philip. It is complex, and yet we understand parts of it, and I think that we can make change ourselves, even on a small scale.
Yeah, no, I think you mentioned a lot of very, very interesting things. I think the importance of story is fundamental. And I believe, that it's always been about the story. The best story wins, the best story connects with people. And now we have, multiple ways of doing it. And I think the old advertising model had reduced stories to a kind of 30-second advertising clip, and I think there's a perception that TikTok is basically an extension of that, very quick, very short kind of messaging where people don't have any attention span. Now, what we're seeing in practice is that that's not true, or at least it's not a single truth, because we have people who really like to listen to a 3-hour podcast, and we have people who like to read long articles on blogs, on LinkedIn, and they don't all have a kind of 3-second or 15-second attention span. So I believe that actually what we've seen in the past couple of years is a fragmentation with lots of different ways, long, short, big, and the creativity of the communicators. How do you tell a story across different platforms so that you connect at a deep level with your audience? And again, it goes back to the best story winning. Now, one of the changes underneath this, and I think that's a fundamental one, and I'd like to hear what your thoughts are on that, is with the media structure as a whole, which is traditional media, and depending on where you come from, it's legacy media, traditional media, whatever, has really lost a massive kind of the authority it used to have, and so-called influencers, bloggers, whatever you want to call them, podcasters are taking a lot of that attention. I think that I'm reading a lot more newsletters nowadays, and I feel that people are investing a lot more time in writing really good highlights, stories, etc. So do you think that we're seeing a kind of fundamental fragmentation away from traditional media? And I think you were talking about, PR is dead, and I agree with you. It's obviously just being reincarnated. It's certainly not dead, and everything can die every 5 minutes if you believe the hype. But I do believe that there is a shift with traditional media, and yes, you need to tell your story differently now, and different people than the traditional journalists and editors can help you to reach that audience. So what do you think about that shift to new media?
Yeah, I think mainstream media, as let's use that umbrella term to signify newspapers, TV, radio, etc., has a dilemma in this area because they are all about mass communication, broadcasting mass communication. And we've seen over the past 2 to 3 decades the decline in particularly print media, where circulations, daily newspapers getting 3 to 5 million here in the UK, for instance, one of the national dailies, 3 to 5 million copies a day. Now they're below 6 figures. Regional newspapers can't even worse. I read a statistic just the other day of the hundreds of regional newspapers countries. Not a single one has a print circulation of above 20,000 copies, and that's not a sustainable business model. So we've got an issue with that, and tie that into the fragmentation of audiences and the reality that anyone's a publisher now. If you've got an internet connection and a means to type or tap and share it online, you're a publisher. So they're competing with all of that. Look at what we hear from some of the metrics that are being talked about a lot recently about TikTok, for instance. Particularly Gen Z, the younger generations are getting most of their news from TikTok. Facebook used to be the prime one, but that's now the old folks. That's their grandparents who are getting it on Facebook. So the dynamics have shifted radically. The nature of what defines news is different. If you look at any newspaper, look at TV news, I do this a lot, and I scratch my head and think, seriously, they call this news? So I'm betraying my generation. That's a fact. I mean, I don't want to hear about, someone, falling over and fell off a bus and everyone laughing and there's someone videoing it. And suddenly that's a news story on the TV news. So, but that's a part of the change. So it is providing many opportunities for many people to tell stories, in which case the mainstream media is, in many cases, from what I observe, certainly, is adjusting to this shift in what is the news and how are they portraying it. We see that here in the UK, for instance, with newspapers like The Guardian, who writes very engaging content in print and online. You see it with the newspaper, the kind of spin-off, The Independent, a few years ago, and some of the others. The Telegraph, which is a right-wing newspaper, they're true to their traditional audience, which tend to be older. So they talk a lot about military and the traditional things they talk about, not exclusively, to be fair to them. They're certainly a modern contemporary newspaper, but TV and so forth. And all of them have podcasts, interestingly. And I didn't answer that question when you asked me earlier, Philip, about podcasts. You mentioned I do one. Yes, I do. Shell Holtz and I started the one we do for at least 20 years ago in January 2005. We're still going strong. We do an interviews podcast as well. And our podcast, our main one, and the monthly one we do is a long form content. It's typically 90 minutes, an hour and a half. And we do shorter ones in the working week that tend to be 20 minutes or so. So we're capturing two types of audience: those who love the long form content, and the vast majority only have the attention span or the patience for short form content. In spite of what we say is, you can put the long one on pause and come back to it. No, they want to have something self-contained. So we do that. And I see mainstream media doing similar things. But then you look more closely and you find that the podcasts that I listen to, which may or may not be typical of anyone else, are they meet my personal interests. That's obviously the first thing. Why am I listening to such a podcast? But the prime reason is because they entertain me as well as inform me. They are entertaining to listen to. They are a pleasure to listen to. The production values are great. You know, if you don't do something that's at least as good as a radio station today, no one's going to listen to your show, because the tools exist that even an individual can do a radio station quality audio, for instance. So it's the landscape is now wide open for anyone, and there are a lot of players in the landscape, and the majority of people who are doing the homebrew podcasts aren't doing it for any monetary reason. They're doing it because they can, and they got something to say, and they might have 50 people listen to it. Now that's niche. And so you then, to take this now down the avenue of reality, that's where you then have the niche influencer communities, the nano influencers and so forth, people who've got less than 100 listeners, but they all have passion about a particular topic. So that's not new. That's been building for quite a while. Will that become more significant? I wouldn't be surprised if it does. I don't know if it will, though, because if you have a story to tell on something you have passion about, and you're able to generate passion in your listeners for what you're talking about, you will attract listeners, and therefore you are likely to attract the attention of people who think you could help their brand or whatever it is, and they'll pay you for it, or some other monetary reward of some type. So that's a shift in the whole marketplace as well. So that's our total landscape, I think, Philip. And I think the podcasting, which I believe I can't remember if it was mentioned in Edelman's report or one other recently that Shell and I talked about on the show even, is becoming more of an attractive proposition to brands to use, almost instead of mainstream broadcast media typically, partly because it's a lot less costly, and mostly, I suspect, because it's got a very clearly identifiable niche audience that isn't feasible for large mainstream media to be paying attention to, really. So the dynamics have shifted drastically. And I think finding the right balance from a business point of view between great storytelling and something that serves your marketing purposes or your communication purposes related to your brand or whatever it might be, finding that cohesion between the two is going to be very important in this shifting landscape, it seems to me.
Yeah, and I think companies today, need to tell their own stories. First of all, I think they should learn to do it themselves. Then they should collaborate with experts, influencers, etc. And I think journalists are becoming people in the conversation. And I think that the people that we want to listen to on podcasts or read about are people that have an identity and a personality. And I actually, as you were talking, I was thinking, for young people who look at the traditional news, it's beginning to sound almost like a kind of AI generated thing with people who don't display emotion when they give you the news. It's like, try to sound as neutral as possible. This is what AI will sound like. Whereas what you want is somebody who says, I'm young, I'm old, I'm opinionated, I'm like this. So you want to hear a human. And so, the mainstream media, I think, is going to have to move to personalities doing podcasts, which will then overlap with other people, I suspect.
Yeah, but look, what's coming is, and what's coming is the AI podcasts. They're already here now in one form or another, where you can get services that they're not very good. That will improve, and just wait for agentic AI to take hold with the AI agents out there, AI agent doing podcasts. I mean, you're going to find it's going to be, I think it'll be chaotic. I truly do.
Absolutely.
But like all changes, as I mentioned earlier, and I think this then provides even more impetus to brands. Let's focus on that, for instance, to become serious experts at their own storytelling with real people. That's not to say that it's wrong to use an AI to be your podcast host. I don't believe that's wrong at all, unless you're trying to pretend that they're not AIs. Which no, you don't do that. If you're going to do an AI doing it, you tell people this is an AI. There's a TV station out there already that is full of AI presenters. Yeah. So do you want to go that route to make them look like people, or do you want to have some other vehicle that doesn't give distraction to that? It focuses on the story. Good example, an audio podcast I used to listen to every single episode until it stopped, put out by Perplexity. That was a 5 to 10 minute audio podcast every single day. That was on a particular topic, the news on issues related to AI. It was excellently done, truly was excellently done. I think the voice, in fact, I'm pretty certain, was done by 11 Labs, who are probably the leading one at the audio, synthetic audio. It was just the right cadence, the right tone, the right personality, and the right naturalness. It wasn't until I think the third episode I listened to that I suddenly thought, wait a minute, is this an AI? And I went back to the first episode. It actually said at the outro that it was an AI. I just haven't picked up on that. Right. And I was seriously impressed with that. And I actually don't know why they stopped it, but they did. It was a pity, because that was really good. That was a good example. So I could see that. And I'm sure there are others. So that's what we're competing with now as well. And that's the reality. And that is coming. So AI on the one hand, particularly agentic AI, which is not with us on a mass status yet, but it's coming, will be very useful for even greater help with your research in terms of the autonomous way in which it can go about doing that. But it could also get involved in this area too. So where does that leave you, the podcaster, the person doing this? Well, that lets you concentrate on better storytelling, maybe doing it in a different way, perhaps, using input from those actions by the AI to help you tell a greater story. So there are many opportunities I see amongst the threats. I like to look at it as I see more opportunities, but it is going to be chaotic, I'm sure of it.
Absolutely. I really like the Notebook LM podcast generator, which actually sounds extremely natural. And I've seen in the Google Lab that there is a similar tool than the Perplexity one you said, doing a kind of 5-minute summary of things. So it's absolutely coming. Now, in terms of what the communicator does with all this, I have two big questions on that. The first one is, about the role of communicators, something that, we hear about, we talk about. What is the role of the communicator in this new world? How do they deal with their fundamental tensions? Because I know that you and Shell talk a lot about ethical questions. So, what happens when your client, when you're working in a company that says we have to go all in on X with all the concerns that you have? So, what is the role of the communicator, and how do they deal with, an organization where the mission maybe goes against what they believe they should be doing?
That's a great question, Philip. The easy answer to that last part is leave and find a job and work somewhere else. That's not easy for everyone. I think that, to me, would be the last resort if you try to change things in the organization. And if it hadn't happened, then that's probably your only option. It is a dilemma. And what it says to me is that we as communicators need to know more about all of this than we currently do. We need to be paying very close attention to all the developments that are going on. And our role in the organization, therefore, in this context, is as a counselor, the advisor, the trusted advisor, to make recommendations with enough authority and credibility and trustworthiness to know that the reaction from those you're talking to or presenting to is such that they know you have done a great job of your research and they should trust you, therefore. They may not agree with you. That's a whole different thing. So that's part of your job. The other part, of course, is the shirt sleeves rolled up and leading a team or doing it yourself or whatever it might be to demonstrate the practicality. So the role of the communicator is shifting from the kind of craft skill side to the more intellectual side of being a subject matter expert and the kind of knowledgeable person that presents situations to their superiors or their client, or whoever it might be, in a way that makes complete and utter sense, and is able then to be persuasive to help secure adoption. Those are the ideals. Mm-hmm. So I think it helps where they are able to get people to agree on the boundaries with all of these approaches. Long-term trust outweighs short-term gain. So the company says, no, we're going to go down this route. You are able to articulate the risk factors of doing that. And it would be hard for the senior people in an organization to disagree that long-term trust outweighs short-term gain, generally speaking, of course. Mm-hmm. In which case you then have a role. Not everyone can do this very well as the negotiator, if you will. So, I've probably described a job role that's almost impossible in reality. But the ethical approach, I think, it kind of mostly comes down to that. It often seems to me. It's not just the right thing to do. We all know that. Everyone will agree it's the right thing to do. It's good business practice. We're seen to be ethical. We are transparent. We don't hide things. We make a point of exposing our thinking, and even that we're not certain about something. So we're not necessarily polished. So all of those things would help you, I think, where the demands of your employer or your client conflict with what you believe. And I think that, to me, is an important thing to be aware of.
So when you meet these young people, they come up to you and they say, okay, I want to start in the communication world. I just graduated. What is your advice to them? What's the thing you tell them that they need to be mindful of?
Well, three things, actually, I would say. I've got three things I would tell someone who's actually probably in Gen Alpha, the ones who were born after 2010, who are now probably 2012 onwards. That would put them at about 18. So I would say three things if you're starting in communication. The industry changes constantly. You've got to keep learning. You need to be utterly curious about everything around you in what you're doing. The second, you need to build your personal brand presence, whether you're blogging, podcasting, whatever it might be, or posting on behalf of your employer. You need a visible voice. People don't like talking to faceless entities. They like talking to people. So if that's not the kind of thing in your business. Well, let's assume it is the thing in your business. So you would have a presence personally, clearly on LinkedIn. You'd have it on other places too, where your employer or your client is doing business, and you would be active on those platforms too as yourself. You might identify that you work for XYZ company, but this is you talking. That when you then are seen talking on behalf of your employer or your client, that you've got the presence, that people recognize it and they're already connected with you. That's what you need to do from the outset. But you then also need, and this actually may be the wrong way around the order I presented, this might be number one, not number three, understand AI and the ethical connection. You need to do that because these will define the future of communication and your success in your role as a communicator. I think ethics, based on understanding the capabilities of AI tools we use, are absolutely critical. And something that I was pleased to see here in the UK, the professional bodies, notably the CIPR, has been pushing this point very strongly amongst its membership about understanding AI and the role of ethics in that. So defining the future of communication, that's my view, and I think it will. But as a young communicator coming in, these are the three things. Not how to do a prompt to ChatGPT. That's going to be a part of understanding. This is about these high-level areas that will define your success or otherwise in your role.
Excellent. So curious, focused on AI and the paradox, but I think so, some very, very good advice. So now finally we have time for some recommendations. So roll jingle.
Recommendations of the week.
So Neville, what are your recommendations for our listeners and viewers?
Well, I've got a book. This is a tricky one because I read a lot of dystopian post-apocalyptic fiction at the moment. Very few business books, but I like the stories of those, how people overcome dreadful situations. But choosing a book was tricky. I was going to suggest first a book called The Metaverse that was published a few years back, and then it was updated with another one. But we're not talking about the metaverse at the moment. We're talking about AI and related things. So the book I would recommend, which was published in 2023, so it's still current, is a book called The Coming Wave. And the author was Mustafa Suleyman. He was the co-founder of DeepMind. That's part of Google. And he's been at the center of the AI revolution. So in his book, he writes about the coming decade, i.e. from now to early 2030s, will be defined by a wave of powerful, fast proliferating new technologies that will create immense prosperity, he believes, but also threaten the nation state and the foundation of global order. As our fragile governments sleepwalk into disaster, he says, we face an existential dilemma, unprecedented harms on one side and the threat of overbearing surveillance on the other. Now, there's a number of books dealing with this thing about the state and surveillance, but this one, I think, is extremely well presented, the arguments, and it's still pretty current. So The Coming Wave by Mustafa Suleyman, I recommend that one.
Excellent. Other recommendations?
I got a podcast I would recommend, and this is a tech podcast. I actually searched and I was debating, should I recommend a communication-related podcast? Because there are a few very good ones out there. But I felt, no, the tech thing is the theme of our discussion. It's interwoven throughout what we're discussing. And this one would be helpful. It's called Hard Fork. It's a great tech trends podcast. It's hosted by Kevin Roos, who's a journalist at the New York Times, and Casey Newton, who's the founder of Platformer, a really good newsletter on tech trends. Now, Hard Fork dives deep into the tech world's most pressing questions and futuristic developments, they say, namely big movements in AI, big tech shakeups, and how tech is impacting society. It's a very good listen.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. I'm an avid listener, and I think, as you said, they are entertaining. And that's the thing. It's interesting, but it's funny, and it's entertaining. And I think it's that combination that makes it very, very listenable.
Yeah, it's worth a shot. It's on all the platforms. So wherever you get your podcast, you can get that. So
Fantastic.
I think I've got a movie to suggest as well.
Please go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, this gave me major issues. Which one would I do? I was thinking about The Matrix. That was back in 1999. The kind of dystopia. So I thought, get off the dystopia kick here. Let's get on to something a little bit more pleasant. But this one that I'm going to recommend is really good. I watched it last week. It's only been out a week. I watched it on Netflix last week. It's been slammed by every single reviewer you could possibly imagine. 2 stars is lucky if they get a 2-star review, but users absolutely love this film. So this is a entertainment, but the themes are very, very interesting in the context of what we're discussing. This film is called The Electric State. It stars Millie Bobby Brown and Chris Pratt, amongst others. Charles Tucci's in there too. And it's set in a parallel world, mid-1990s in the US, after a war between humans and robots. And the story revolves around an orphaned teenager traversing the American West with a sweet but mysterious robot and an eccentric drifter in search of a younger brother. So that's the story premise, but the setting really is extraordinary. And by the way, this film, according to all the published reports, cost $320 million. It's the most expensive streaming film ever made. According to Netflix, it shot to #1 in the UK and I believe 20-something other countries the day after it was released, of popularity amongst users. And I've seen, so I watched it with a sense of curiosity. Why are all the reviewers slamming this thing, and all the streaming users absolutely delighting it, of every age range you could possibly see? I know 6 friends of mine have seen it, all ranging from older boomers to very young Gen Z. They all love it too. So if that's any indicator, I loved it. I think this is an entertaining view on something that is credible, that is possible. So if anyone listening watched I, Robot back in, I think it was the late 90s, that was a predictive dystopia, but credible and with an engaging storyline. This is delightful, this film. It's only, I think it's a 15, so it's got a bit of violence in there, not a lot of sex, and a lot of language, but it's a very contemporary, and I think it would sit alongside nicely as you think about all the issues we've talked about in this conversation.
Fantastic. So thank you so much for those recommendations. In fact, we have Black Mirror's new season is coming out. So if you want some dystopian things that are coming up soon, I'm looking forward to that. My recommendation this week is actually a book by Dan Ariely, Misbelief, which is the psychology behind believing in conspiracy theories. Very, very powerful analysis. His own experience on being attacked by various groups. And basically helps you to understand why people believe in very extreme things, the reinforcements that make them double down on these beliefs. So I think it's incredibly useful. But with all that, that's all we got time for. So thank you so much for sharing your experience, your insights, your recommendations. Be great to have you. We will see you online. And I want to recommend once again FIR, fantastic podcast that Neville and Shell do. And basically follow all of your platforms. We will share them with the podcast so people can find you on Ghost and on the channels that you use, including Blue Sky and Mastodon, I believe, and LinkedIn. Yep. So have a fantastic rest of the day. We'll see you online.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Philip. My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much for watching this episode of the ZNL podcast. Did you like it? If so, please share it on your social media, subscribe, and give us a comment. We will see you again on the next episode. Until then, remember, stay always one step ahead.